The courthouse was alive with the usual noise of clattering shoes and murmured conversations, the air thick with the scent of paper and anticipation. In the center of it all, Judge Mason, a middle-aged man with a reputation for his sharp remarks and quick judgments, sat at his elevated bench. His demeanor was dismissive, as though the day's cases were nothing more than a tedious obligation. His cold eyes scanned the room, barely glancing at the defendant. Today's case was no different than the others, a chance for him to get through another day of work with as little effort as possible. Andrea, the defendant, sat quietly in the witness stand. She was a black woman, modestly dressed in a simple gray suit, her posture straight but her hands clasped tightly in her lap. There was a quiet strength in the way she held herself, despite the nervousness that flickered in her eyes. This wasn't her first time in a courtroom, nor would it be her last. Andrea had spent years fighting for justice, for her voice to be heard in spaces where people like her were often silenced. Today, however, felt different. The tension in the air told her that this time would be more than just another fight, it would be a defining moment. Judge Mason cleared his throat and leaned forward, his fingers drumming against the surface of his bench as he looked down at Andrea with an almost amused expression. "Well, well, well," he began, his voice dripping with condescension. "I see we've got quite the character here today. A little out of place, aren't we?" He gestured vaguely toward her modest attire, a smirk tugging at the corner of his lips. "I suppose you didn't get the memo. This isn't a charity event. You might want to dress for the occasion." The courtroom was silent for a moment, before a few snickers erupted from the gallery. The judge continued, leaning back in his chair, clearly enjoying the attention. "Maybe you're here to sell some sort of magic beans, or perhaps pitch a new reality show? I hear the public loves a good underdog story." His words were laced with mockery, and it was clear he was playing to the crowd. Andrea's face flushed slightly, the sting of his words sinking deep. She was well aware of the undertones in his speech, racism disguised as humor. It wasn't the first time she'd encountered this type of treatment, but something about the judge's arrogant tone felt different. He wasn't just dismissing her, he was belittling everything she had fought for. Her heart raced, a familiar knot tightening in her stomach, but she didn't let it show. She'd endured worse insults in her life, from places far more dangerous than this courtroom. Her mother had always told her, "You can't control the words others throw at you, but you can control how you respond." Andrea kept her back straight, and her gaze steady, locking eyes with the judge. Her lips parted, but instead of retaliating with words or an angry outburst, she simply took a slow, deliberate breath. In that moment, she made a choice, not to shrink under his ridicule, but to rise above it. The room felt heavier now, the weight of his words pressing down on her, but Andrea didn't flinch. She didn't speak, but a quiet determination burned behind her eyes. The judge's mocking tone, his dismissive laughter, would not break her. She would let her actions speak louder than his words ever could. Andrea's heart pounded in her chest, but her face remained the picture of composure. As the judge continued his mockery, the words began to blur into the background, the sound of his condescending tone becoming a distant hum. She reached into her bag, her fingers brushing against the cool metal of what she'd brought with her. Slowly, deliberately, she pulled out a small silver badge. It gleamed under the fluorescent lights, its weight a symbol of everything she had worked for. The courtroom fell silent as Andrea lifted the badge and held it out in front of her, the cold metal catching the light. It was the emblem of the Supreme Court. The insignia was unmistakable, a symbol of power, of authority, of the very system that had been built to serve justice. It wasn't just a badge, it was the embodiment of the very values that the judge, in his arrogance, had been so quick to mock. The judge's face froze as he saw the badge, his smirk, once wide and mocking, faltered, and then disappeared altogether. For a moment, the entire room seemed to hold its breath. Andrea didn't say a word, she didn't need to. Her presence, her quiet confidence, spoke volumes in that instant. She stood tall, her posture unyielding, as the weight of her gesture settled over everyone in the courtroom. The prosecutor, who had been smirking earlier at the judge's comments, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. His smile vanished, replaced by a look of uncertainty. He glanced at the judge, who was now visibly pale, unable to make a sound. The jury, too, exchanged confused glances. They had been ready to follow the judge's lead, to take his cue on how to perceive Andrea. But now, that authority had crumbled in an instant. The silence in the room was suffocating. Andrea didn't need to speak for everyone to understand. The judge had underestimated her, had belittled her without any knowledge of who she truly was. The room was no longer divided into defendant and judge, it was divided into the old power structure and the new, the one that Andrea now represented. The judge finally managed to stammer, his voice shaky. You are one of them," he muttered, his words trailing off in disbelief. He had never imagined that the woman he had so casually mocked could hold such a powerful position. Andrea didn't respond, she didn't need to. Her calm eyes, steady and unwavering, told the entire story. She had been underestimated, dismissed, and mocked, but now, in this very moment, she had taken control of the room. She didn't need to speak to command authority. The badge was all that was needed. The silence that followed was not uncomfortable for her. It was a moment of clarity for everyone in that courtroom, a realization that the tides had changed. Andrea remained standing, the Supreme Court badge still held firmly in her hand, glistening under the harsh courtroom lights. For a brief moment, no one moved, no one breathed. The judge, his face a mixture of shock and disbelief, stared at her, as if seeing her for the first time. The weight of his ignorance was beginning to dawn on him, and it was clear that he had no idea who she truly was. As the courtroom held its collective breath, Andrea's calm demeanor remained unshaken. She knew what was happening, she knew the storm that was about to hit, and she had prepared herself for it. But even she couldn't help but feel a small surge of satisfaction as the reality of the situation began to unfold. The judge's voice, once confident and mocking, faltered. "I don't understand," he muttered, his eyes darting from the badge in Andrea's hand to her face, now calm and resolute. You're one of them?" Andrea didn't respond immediately. Instead, she let the silence settle, letting the room feel the tension hanging in the air. The judge had underestimated her, assumed she was just another defendant to belittle, another person of color to mock without consequence. But she was so much more. Finally, Andrea spoke, her voice steady but carrying the weight of years of hard-fought battles. "I am more than you think," she said softly. "I've worked my entire life to be here, despite the odds stacked against me. I've fought for justice in the system you claim to serve, and now I am a part of the very institution you mock so easily." The room seemed to come alive as the truth about Andrea began to sink in. She wasn't just some regular defendant, she wasn't just a woman trying to make her case before a judge. Andrea had worked tirelessly through the legal system, faced countless obstacles, and fought for every opportunity she had earned. She had worked as a public defender, fighting for those who couldn't afford high-priced lawyers, and slowly but surely, she had climbed the ranks. Her promotion to the Supreme Court was the culmination of years of dedication, sacrifice, and perseverance. The badge she held in her hand wasn't just a piece of metal, it was the symbol of everything she had accomplished in a world that had continuously tried to hold her back. As Andrea's words settled in, the judge's face went from pale to completely drained of color. His mouth hung open in shock, but no words came out. It was as if the realization that he had belittled someone so accomplished, so powerful, hit him all at once, and he couldn't process it. He had made a grave mistake, one that could never be undone. "I didn't know," the judge stammered, his voice trembling. He cleared his throat and tried again. I apologize, Miss Andrea, I didn't know who you were. Please, But Andrea didn't give him the satisfaction of finishing his sentence. His apology meant nothing now. The damage had been done, not just to her, but to his own credibility. The judge had used his power to degrade her, to assume she was less than him because of the color of her skin and her modest appearance. And now, standing before him as someone far more powerful than he ever imagined, Andrea knew there was no way he could undo the harm he had caused. "I don't need your apology," she said, her voice firm. "You can apologize all you want, but it doesn't change what you've done. It doesn't change how you've treated me, and how many others like me, simply because we don't fit your narrow view of what people should be." The silence in the courtroom was thick, heavy. Andrea's words had cut through the tension like a knife. The judge's apologies had no weight, no value. The power dynamic in the room had completely shifted. He had once stood in a position of authority, looking down on Andrea, believing he could control her. Now she stood tall, her identity clear, her authority undeniable. and the room once filled with uncertainty now felt like a place of revelation. Andrea had not only taken control of her own fate, but had shown everyone in that room that no one could be reduced to a stereotype, no matter how powerful or dismissive the other person might seem. Andrea stood tall in the courtroom, her calm demeanor a stark contrast to the judge's increasingly flustered state. She didn't need to say another word. The badge she held, the truth of her identity, had already spoken louder than any apology or excuse the judge could muster. The room remained eerily silent, the tension hanging in the air like a thick fog. Andrea's presence radiated power, but it was the quiet strength of her composure that exposed the judge for who he truly was, someone who had relied on his position to belittle others, never imagining that he would be the one exposed. The judge, now visibly pale, struggled to regain control. His hands trembled as he fumbled for his words. "I deeply apologize, Miss Andrea," he stammered, his voice shaking. "I didn't know who you were. Please forgive me. This was a misunderstanding." But Andrea didn't react to his apology. She didn't need to. She simply stood there, unwavering, her eyes fixed on him, allowing the weight of the situation to settle on his shoulders. She didn't need to point out his prejudice. His actions had already exposed them for everyone in the room to see. The judge's attempt to cover up his mistake with an apology felt hollow and insincere. The damage was already done. The courtroom, which had once been under the judge's firm control, now felt entirely different. The power had shifted. No one in the room would forget how easily he had resorted to mocking and belittling a woman of color simply because she didn't fit the image he had in mind. No one would forget how he had misjudged someone of Andrea's caliber, assuming her to be insignificant, when in reality, she held one of the highest positions in the legal system. The following days brought swift consequences. An internal investigation into the judge's behavior was launched, and word of his actions spread quickly. News outlets picked up the story, broadcasting it across the country. Headlines read, "Judge mocked Black woman in court, now faces investigation after shocking revelation." Clips of the incident went viral, the judge's disgraceful behavior making him the subject of ridicule. His once untouchable reputation crumbled in the blink of an eye. Andrea, on the other hand, became a symbol of strength and resilience. People rallied behind her, praising her dignity in the face of adversity. She had not only held her ground in a courtroom that sought to undermine her, but had exposed the deep-seated biases that still lingered in the legal system. Though her actions were subtle, the impact was far-reaching. As the investigation into the judge's conduct continued, his fate became sealed. The court system found that his actions violated ethical standards and undermined the integrity of the courtroom. Disciplinary action was imminent, and the once confident judge now found himself at the center of a scandal that threatened to destroy his career. He was placed on administrative leave, while a more thorough review of his past conduct took place. The judge's downfall was swift and unforgiving. Once a figure of authority, he now had to face the consequences of his own ignorance and prejudice. His attempt to cover up his mistake only made it worse, and the truth, as it always does, came out in the end. Andrea, however, continued on her path. The Supreme Court badge she held was no longer just a symbol of her promotion, it was a testament to her strength and perseverance, a reminder that even in the face of adversity, one person could make a difference. And while the judge's reputation lay in ruins, Andrea stood tall, her power and composure shining through, knowing that she had not only earned her place in the court but had taken a stand against the very system that had once tried to silence her. As Andrea walked out of the courthouse, her head held high, the weight of the moment settled deep within her. She had done more than just expose the judge's prejudice, she had sent a message to the world. Her calm composure, her quiet yet powerful stand against discrimination, had spoken volumes. She had proven that no one, no matter their position of power, had the right to diminish her or anyone else based on their race, gender, or background. With every step she took, Andrea's presence became a beacon of strength and resilience. She knew that her actions would ripple far beyond this courtroom. The story of what had happened would spread quickly, carried across news outlets, social media, and the hearts of those who had felt the sting of injustice. And with that, people began to rally behind her, those who had been silenced by the same biases, those who had faced the same struggles, those who had been overlooked. Andrea had become more than just a woman fighting for her own dignity. She had become a symbol of hope, a reminder that courage and integrity could topple the most deeply ingrained prejudices. Her actions weren't just about winning a case or gaining justice for herself, they were about empowering others to stand up for themselves, to find their own voice, and to challenge a system that sought to keep them down. In the days and weeks that followed, Andrea received messages of support from all over the country. People thanked her for showing them that even the smallest act of defiance could spark change. And though her journey had been long and fraught with difficulty, Andrea knew that this moment, this victory, would not just be hers, it would belong to everyone who had ever been underestimated, belittled or dismissed. As she walked forward, with her badge gleaming in the sunlight, Andrea knew that this was just the beginning of a much larger movement. And so Andrea's unwavering strength and composure turned the courtroom upside down. What started as a simple day in court turned into a powerful moment of justice and change. Her actions didn't just expose the judge's prejudice, they sparked a movement that resonated far beyond that courtroom. Andrea proved that one person, standing firm in their truth, can challenge even the most entrenched systems of power. Her story is a reminder to us all that no matter the odds, no matter how much we're underestimated, we must never allow ourselves to be silenced. Each of us has the power to make a difference, to stand up for what's right, and to demand the respect we deserve. If Andrea's story moved you, if it inspired you, we invite you to stand with her. Share this video, leave a comment below, and let us know how you're making your voice heard. Together we can be the change we want to see in the world. Remember, your voice matters, always. Like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories that inspire change. Let's keep the conversation going.